Conservatives are dead set on killing Planned Parenthood, and they're not going to let little things like the facts or shame or science get in their way. Now, during the debates that have been going on in Congress this week with Planned Parenthood on the one side and all the Republicans attacking them and cutting them off on the other side, they put up this chart. Now, you're seeing this chart. Understand that they said that Planned Parenthood's yearly report included this chart. Not true at all. They eventually had to walk that back. Their lawyers said, no, we can't actually back that up. But you're seeing there, Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, abortions up, life-saving procedures down. We'll get to the actual chart in just a second, but just the idea that, that Planned Parenthood included this in the yearly report, and that's the title they gave it. This is how deluded they are about the priorities of Planned Parenthood, that they think that they're, cheering if abortions are up and other procedures are down. But let's get to the actual results. So you're seeing there something that looks like a chart. It looks like the sort of visual representation of information that normally is used in congressional hearings, is used in articles online, contains something that could actually be worthwhile to you trying to figure out what's going on with this issue. But you're not going to get any of that here. Now, these numbers seem to be largely true. The abortion numbers do go from 289,000 back in 2006 up to 327,000 in 2013. And the cancer screenings did go down from a little more than 2 million 9 years ago to 935,000, which seems like a pretty steep drop. But look at the way that they've fucking represented that. The bars actually cross each other. But when you start to look at any part of it, other than that this confirms my previously held beliefs about abortions and Planned Parenthood, none of it actually makes sense. This is how much they actually despise science. There's no vertical axis here. It's not a chart if there's not a vertical axis. There's no point in plotting it in 2 dimensions if all you have is a fucking timeline. The vertical orientation of this apparently means absolutely nothing. Now, on the left-hand side, you have 2 million. Yeah, it is actually higher than 289,000, although the gap between it means nothing to us since there's no vertical axis. But then on the other side, 327,000 is way higher than 935,000. Charts are actually meant to be used for something. Have you ever dated someone who's not too smart, and you get in an argument, and they try to use the sort of language that they've heard smart people use in an argument? That's what's going on here. They have seen charts. They know that liberals like using science and information. And they're like, man, we want to get us some of that. But I don't want to actually learn anything about stats or how to assemble any sort of graph like this. So I'm actually just going to put numbers there and draw pink and red lines. Now, thankfully, Vox has put together a more accurate representation of this that would actually use the real numbers and put it in a way that actually makes sense with vertical and horizontal axes. You're seeing that here. So you're seeing the gigantic gap between the cancer screening and prevention services, where there are far more cancer screenings being done than abortions. And then the gap becomes smaller, but it's still 3 times higher. And you notice there that for some reason the abortions aren't going up at a 45-degree angle anymore. All of a sudden, they're only going up a little bit. I did some additional research. Yes, the number of abortions did go up in the past 9 years by about 10%. By the way, did you know that our population has gone up by 16, 17 million people in America over the past 9 years? It could even be higher. That's the information I was actually able to find. Yeah, you would expect that it would go up marginally over time. Now, why the cancer screenings are going down, that actually is interesting, and so I have done a lot of research on that. Now, it's a long period of time, 9 years there. It might be that a number of other programs have been developed in the intervening years, including things like Obamacare, that might have allowed women to now have the health insurance where they can go to normal clinics and hospitals and things like that, whereas before they might have felt that they needed to go to Planned Parenthood. So that's certainly true. Here's another thing. I noticed at the beginning of this year, Texas not only cut $1.2 million in funding from Planned Parenthood, but it banned them from being involved in the state's cancer screening program. Does that have anything to do with abortion? Screening people for cancer? Does that have anything to do with fetal organ harvesting or anything else that you say you're against? No, they just want to hurt the women that rely on Planned Parenthood for cancer screening. And that's just Texas, by the way. And there have been a number of other states. Louisiana recently. Kasich talked about this. Chris Christie talked about this recently. States across the country have been cutting funding for Planned Parenthood. Is it any wonder that over the past few years they've been doing fewer services? Now, they still do the abortions, because even though conservatives don't seem to understand this, when you go in to get an abortion at Planned Parenthood, you pay for the abortion. It's not free. It's not that you just walk in and they're like, oh, by the way, there's the abortion room. We don't need an ID or anything. Just go in there. It'll be free, and then we'll give you a sandwich, and then you go on your way. That's not how it actually works. Now, it might be that some of the cancer screenings and things like that, they don't actually require you to pay for, and in that case, they can't necessarily afford to pay for it as much. Perhaps they should start to ask for the women to pay for it, since it is important. And they look at this chart, by the way, and say, wow, abortions went up by 10%. That is the worst thing in the world. And they're not bothered by the fact that the cancer screenings went down. They're not concerned at all that a lot of women might be walking around possibly with cancer, and they don't know it. Which is obviously terrible for them, terrible for their families, terrible for their friends, and probably also terrible for the country as well, since they're not going to get the preventative medicine that would have allowed them to get rid of the cancer early, before it became possibly terminal. But they don't care about that. They only care about the abortions. Now, the fact that STI and STD testing and treatment is up 50% over this time period, from 3 million procedures to 4.5 million procedures, they don't care about that. The fact that contraception, they're still doing, in 2013, by the way, they did 3.6 million procedures having to do with passing out contraception and things like that. So, look, the STI treatment, that seems like a good thing. We want people to have fewer STIs and STDs, especially because some of them can be passed to children and things like that. And then the contraception. So that 3.5 million, by the way, is still more than 10 times as many procedures as the number for abortions that they're so happy to continually publicize. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you deny those 3.5 million instances of passing out the contraception? Now, these are responsible people, so a lot of them will probably go to some other clinic if they can, if there's even one available, although in many areas of the country there are not, especially for lower-income people. Or they might have to pay for condoms and other contraception that is extremely expensive. Most of them. But some of them won't. And they will still have sex. And some of those will have kids. Possibly. They'll get pregnant. Will some of them get abortions? Almost certainly. I don't know the numbers enough to actually break down exactly how many that is, but if you cut out those 3.5 million instances of passing out the contraception, that's a certain number of abortions. And this is the pro-life party that is totally fine with cutting that out. I got news for you. You don't like the 300,000 abortions that Planned Parenthood did in 1 year. I understand that. I understand why you don't like it, and you want to fight against it. Even though the ways that you do it, in fact, actually encourage more abortions. Those women do not want to have children. They either don't want to have children and or can't care for the children. They don't want to have the children, they're not going to have the children. They're going to find the abortion somewhere else. We've been through this before, by the way. Abortion has been outlawed and is still outlawed in many countries throughout the world. It does not stop women from getting abortions. It only stops them from getting relatively safe abortions. So what you're doing there is possibly condemning the women to infertility, to medical problems, to death in many instances, and for you, you would probably say that they deserved it because they did something that to you is immoral. To me, that seems like the height of immorality. To consign those women to that fate. To make it harder for them to get contraception, to make it harder for them to get STI and STD treatments. And I've been focusing on the women, but of course many men go to Planned Parenthood as well, and many men will, of course, benefit from the contraception, from the STD treatments, either directly or indirectly by the fact that the women that they know will be getting it. But all of this, of course, is irrelevant to those who are just on a crusade to defund Planned Parenthood, that don't care about the various services that it provides, that just want to take a stand against abortion, despite the fact that the vast majority of them have never lived in an America where it was illegal. I don't know when we're going to get past this battle. I think that we're going to get past this individual battle with Planned Parenthood's funding intact. But the damage that they're willing to do to this country, to this country's women, is simply mind-boggling. And doesn't seem likely to end anytime soon.